Hey, what's up you guys? It's SuperRaeDizzle here. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'll be showing you guys the do's and don'ts of watercolor. There'll be tips and techniques that help me personally with my watercolor, and hopefully they will help you as well if you are struggling. Of course, I will have all the links to all the supplies I'm using in the description down below. And real quick before we start, please note I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time working on proportions or making this look super hyper realistic. And of course, if you guys want to see every single thing that I've ever painted or drawn, you can follow me on Instagram. And yeah, without further ado, let's begin. The first don't is using the wrong paper. So right here I'm just going to use some regular drawing paper instead of watercolor paper. You want to use watercolor paper specifically because regular paper will be a little bit too thin compared to the watercolor paper, and so it'll kind of break and be super flimsy. So right now I'm just going to shake it, yeah, just to show you guys how thin this paper is compared to the watercolor paper. Now right off the bat you can definitely tell that the regular paper is much more flimsy than the watercolor paper. Now with that being said, it is possible to use regular paper. It's just a little bit harder and it'll break a lot easier, but I will make a video in the future on how to use regular paper for watercolor. So now that we have our paper, as always, the right side will be the do's and the left side will be the don'ts. So now that we have your paper, this brings us to our next point, using the wrong pencil to outline. So on the don't side, I'm going to use a heavy, regular mechanical pencil, and then on the do side, I'm going to use an H pencil. Now the reason you want to try to avoid a mechanical pencil is because it's really hard and it's hard to take it away and kind of erase it later. While an H pencil, which you can get in like pencil sets or whatever, it's super light and you kind of won't be able to see it whenever the final piece is done. So with the power of editing, I'm going to cut to the finished outlines of both pieces and I will see you in a second. And boom, just like that, you can definitely tell the difference. Now there are some instances where you do want your lines to show, like if you're doing illustrations or something like that. But even then, you could always cover up your lines with black ink or pen or anything like that. Now this brings us to our next don't, and that is adding way too much water way too soon. So on the don't side, I'm going to be super dramatic with it and add way too much water than what is necessary for the paper. And of course, on the do side, I'm going to take it nice and slow and add a nice little wash of watercolor. Working with watercolor takes a little bit longer than you would, say, drawing, and the reason for that is because you have to build it up layer by layer. So I always start off with the parts that I know are going to be almost black by the time I'm done. So everything that I just laid down now, by the time I'm done, it'll be almost pure black or have a really dark color to it. And I'm not adding hardly any water to this because I don't want to mess up my layers. Which brings us to our next point, trying to add shadows way too soon. Alright, so I have my very first layer on there, and I noticed that it's not as dark as I would like it to be. So while it's still wet, I'm going to add a lot of pigment on there to try to darken it up. But it doesn't work because it's starting to pool, and also I haven't gotten a chance to build up my other layers yet, and that's really important with watercolor because once it's on there, it's on there. That sucker isn't coming off. In fact, back in college, my art professor used to tell me just straight up use water for your first layer. Like that's how light we want to start off. So now with my do side, now that my first layer is completely dry, I'm going to add in a second layer that is a little bit darker than my first layer. Plus, another benefit of starting from lightest to darkest is that it's easier to hide your mistakes. So like as soon as you put that light layer on, you can decide right then and there like, ooh, yeah, no, that looks bad. So now, just again to further demonstrate how important it is with layering, I'm going to add a third dark layer to my teapot. And you guys will see the hot mess that is the teapot. So now you'll notice that it's really starting to pull by the third layer, and all that dark that I'm putting on right now, it's starting to feather out, which I really don't want if I'm trying to build up my shadows, because then the color is going to smear everywhere. And it's like, nah, honey, not today. And naturally speaking, I'm just taking my time with the do side, which is going to take a little bit longer than the don't side. So I'm going to speed up the parts where I'm just building up layer by layer. This brings us to our next do's and don'ts, the dreaded overworking your watercolor. Alright, so I want to try to start blending in a color, or working it in, or whatever. So I'm blending, and I keep blending until I get the overworking of my watercolor. And what this means is that you start pulling up paper and it starts changing the texture of your paper. So again, this is another important reason to use watercolor paper. And how I like to avoid that is just by lightly taking it one step at a time. And I know I keep saying that, I'm like a broken record, but that's truly what watercolor is just patience. So after I filmed that, there's 2 hours of me just working on this teapot. So I'm going to cut through all that, and I'm going to skip to the last don't, and this pot will be much more finished in the next few seconds. Woo! Look at that. Alright people, so this brings us to our last advice, and this is a do. And that is pull out your highlights to make them pop even more. So remember, when in doubt, pull out. So what that means is that you can't really add white to watercolor. There's not like a white watercolor, if that makes sense. I mean, there is, but it doesn't really work. So what I'm going to do is try to pull out the white that I have. So I'm going to put a light wash all over the background just to make the white pop even more. So what this will do is that the only white that is showing is the highlights. And this will also give it an ambiance and kind of ground that bad boy into place, so it's not like it's just floating in space. So that being said, here is the final color corrected version. Aw yeah, look at that. But you guys can definitely tell a difference in the technique. So I hope you guys learned a little something today. If you have any questions, leave it down below. Thank you so much again for watching my video. Here are all my links if you guys want to follow me anywhere. I love you guys, and I will see you soon.